Welcome to Compact Warfare from CompactHistories.com, the show where we explore key moments from the history of conflict, from ancient battlefields to modern warfare. This is episode 85, The Battle of the Atlantic. When Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, its survival depended upon ships. The country imported much of its food, almost all its oil, and enormous quantities of metals, timber, and industrial materials. It also needed to transport troops and weapons around an empire whose territories stretched across the world. Every cargo vessel approaching a British port therefore formed part of a vast maritime lifeline. If Germany could cut that lifeline, Britain might be starved into submission without a German soldier crossing the Channel. The danger was familiar. During the First World War, German submarines had brought Britain close to catastrophe before the convoy system helped contain them. Yet the Royal Navy entered the new conflict expecting to face several different threats, including surface raiders, mines, aircraft, and submarines. It possessed too few escort vessels to protect every merchant route immediately. Many naval officers also believed that sonar, then commonly known by the British term ASDIC, had made the submarine far less dangerous than it had been in 1917. Germany began the war with only 57 U-boats, and fewer than half were suitable for sustained Atlantic operations. Their commander, Karl Dönitz, wanted a fleet of around 300 operational submarines, enough to maintain a large force at sea, while others travelled to patrol areas or underwent repair. He favoured the Type 7 U-boat, a relatively small and manoeuvrable vessel designed to attack on the surface at night. Dönitz believed groups of submarines could overwhelm convoy escorts by converging upon merchant formations and striking together. The campaign began within hours of the declaration of war. On the 3rd of September, U-30 torpedoed the passenger liner Athenia west of Ireland, killing 112 people. Germany initially denied responsibility because the attack violated its own orders and risked provoking neutral opinion. Other early successes were less ambiguous. U-29 sank the aircraft carrier HMS Courageous, while Gunther Prien took U-47 into Scapa Flow and sank the battleship HMS Royal Oak. These spectacular attacks exposed weaknesses in British defences, although neither directly threatened the merchant fleet upon which Britain relied. The Royal Navy quickly introduced convoys, grouping merchant ships under escort rather than allowing them to sail independently. Naval vessels could not guard the entire ocean, but they could concentrate around formations most likely to attract attack. The system reduced opportunities for isolated sinkings, although it created tempting clusters of targets whenever U-boats found a convoy. Britain also armed merchant ships, established coastal air patrols, and began expanding its escort fleet. During the first months, the struggle remained limited by Germany's small submarine force and its distant bases. U-boats had to sail from German ports, pass around northern Scotland, and spend precious fuel reaching the Atlantic. That restriction was about to disappear. Germany's invasion of Norway and Western Europe would transform the geography of the war, giving Dönitz the bases from which his wolf packs could launch a far more dangerous offensive. The struggle for the Atlantic was entering a new and far more destructive phase of warfare. Germany's conquest of France in June 1940 changed the Atlantic campaign. U-boats could now operate from ports such as Lorient, Brest, Saint-Nazaire and La Pallice, shortening their journeys to British shipping routes and increasing the time they could spend hunting. Massive concrete pens were constructed to protect submarines from bombing. At the same time, Britain faced invasion, the Mediterranean demanded warships, and escorts were diverted to many competing duties. The Atlantic lifeline had become more exposed and difficult to defend. Dönitz used radio intelligence and reconnaissance to direct submarines towards likely convoy routes. Once a U-boat sighted a convoy, it transmitted a report and shadowed the ships while other boats converged. The resulting formation became known as a wolf pack. Its submarines usually attacked independently rather than moving in a rigid group, often approaching on the surface after dark. ASDIC was designed principally to locate submerged targets and could struggle against a low U-boat silhouette among merchant vessels. Escorts might chase one attacker while several others slipped through. The second half of 1940 became known to German submariners as the First Happy Time. Commanders including Otto Kretschmer, Joachim Schepke, and Günther Prien sank remarkable amounts of shipping. In October, the poorly escorted convoys SC-7 and HX-79 lost 32 merchant ships between them. The armed merchant cruiser HMS Jervis Bay sacrificed itself defending convoy HX-84 from the German pocket battleship Admiral Scheer, demonstrating that surface warships still posed a serious threat alongside U-boats. Britain responded by reorganizing Atlantic Command. Admiral Sir Percy Noble moved the Western Approach's headquarters to Liverpool, where naval staff could better control the principal convoy routes. Older American destroyers obtained through the Destroyers for Bases Agreement entered service, while growing numbers of Flower-class corvettes provided basic but urgently needed protection. Their endurance made these uncomfortable little ships valuable escorts. Canada assumed an increasingly important role, expanding its navy and guarding much of the Western Passage. Experience gradually turned collections of ships into specialist escort groups. Crews learned that preserving the convoy mattered more than pursuing every detected submarine. Radar began helping ships find surfaced U-boats at night, while high-frequency direction finding allowed operators to trace radio transmissions. Aircraft forced submarines underwater, where their speed and visibility were sharply reduced. British intelligence also worked to read German naval signals, although changes to Enigma procedures repeatedly disrupted that advantage. The U-boat elite suffered a severe blow in March 1941, when Prien, Schepke and Kretschmer were killed or captured within days. Surface raiders also became harder to sustain after Bismarck was hunted down in May. Yet shipping losses remained dangerous, and improved escorts protected only the sections of ocean they could reach. The Central Atlantic still lay beyond most land-based aircraft, creating an unguarded region in which convoys could lose their protective air cover. Closing that gap required more ships, longer-range aircraft, better intelligence, and deeper cooperation with the United States that had not yet entered the war. The Atlantic battle was now moving beyond a purely British struggle. President Franklin D. Roosevelt regarded Britain's survival as essential to American security, even while the United States still remained formally neutral. In March 1941, the Lend-Lease Act allowed American weapons, ships, and supplies to be transferred to countries whose defense was considered vital to the United States. American forces occupied Iceland, extended Western Atlantic patrols, and began escorting convoys. This brought American warships into an undeclared naval conflict with Germany. Violence followed before any formal declaration of war. In September 1941, U-652 fired torpedoes at the American destroyer USS Greer after being tracked by the ship and a British aircraft. The following month, U-568 damaged USS Kearney, killing 11 sailors, and U-552 sank USS Reuben James with the loss of more than 100 lives. Roosevelt authorized aggressive protection of shipping, making American entry into the Atlantic struggle a reality in everything but name. Intelligence became central to convoy planning. At Bletchley Park, British cryptanalysts worked to decipher German naval Enigma communications, while direction-finding stations located U-boats from their radio signals. Documents and an Enigma machine recovered from U-110 in May 1941 helped the effort, as did codebooks captured during other naval operations. When German messages could be read promptly, convoys were diverted around patrol lines. The information was handled carefully so that Germany would not realize its system had been compromised. Intelligence never removed the problem of distance. Most aircraft could patrol only a limited radius from Britain, Iceland, or Newfoundland. Between those areas lay the Mid-Atlantic Gap, sometimes called the Black Pit, where land-based aircraft could not provide continuous cover. U-boats could surface, recharge their batteries, maneuver quickly, and organize attacks with less fear of being spotted from above. Escorts remained with the merchant ships, but their limited numbers and fuel restricted lengthy hunts. Several technologies promised an answer. Very long-range consolidated B-24 Liberators could reach much farther into the Atlantic, but competing demands delayed their availability for convoy protection. Escort carriers offered another solution by bringing a small group of aircraft directly into the ocean. Improved radar, more reliable depth charges, and head-thrown weapons were being developed. At the same time, purpose-built support groups would eventually reinforce threatened convoys instead of remaining tied to a single formation. Cooperation also produced difficulties. British, Canadian, and American commands used different procedures, faced shortages of trained crews, and disagreed over the best allocation of aircraft and escorts. Merchant construction struggled to keep pace with losses, and every delayed convoy affected Britain's stocks of food, fuel, and ammunition. The contest was becoming an industrial race as much as a naval campaign. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 brought the United States formally into the war. Hitler declared war on America 4 days later, giving Dönitz access to a vast new field of targets. American coastal waters were crowded with shipping, yet local defenses had little experience of mass submarine warfare. Rather than attacking the strongest part of the Allied convoy system, Dönitz sent his U-boats towards its least prepared edge. In January 1942, 5 long-range U-boats arrived off the eastern coast of the United States. Operation Paukenschlag, or Drumbeat, achieved almost immediate success. Merchant ships sailed independently along predictable routes, coastal cities remained illuminated at night, and peacetime routines persisted despite the danger offshore. Against the glow of seaside resorts and harbours, submariners could see the silhouettes of passing vessels and attack them with little interference. Others soon joined the first boats. Tankers carrying oil from the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean became particularly valuable targets because their cargoes were essential to the Allied war effort. Burning ships were sometimes visible from American beaches. U-boats also laid mines and struck near the approaches to major ports, forcing the United States to defend thousands of miles of coastline. German crews called the period the Second Happy Time. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, has often been accused of refusing British advice about convoys. The reality was more complicated, involving severe shortages of escorts, aircraft, and trained personnel, but the delay was costly. Partial measures such as patrols and designated shipping lanes sometimes concentrated targets without providing continuous protection. A comprehensive interlocking coastal convoy system began to take shape only in the spring. Blackouts, air patrols, and escorted routes then made the American coast steadily more dangerous for U-boats. Dönitz shifted the offensive southwards and into the Caribbean, where submarines attacked refineries, ports, and tanker routes. They also entered the Gulf of Mexico and operated near the mouth of the Mississippi. Other boats hunted off Canada, while the Battle of the St. Lawrence brought attacks deep into Canadian waters. This forced the Allies to divide resources among convoys, coastal shipping, troop movements, and anti-submarine patrols. February brought another serious setback when Germany introduced the 4-rotor M4 Enigma machine for Atlantic U-boats. British cryptanalysts could no longer read the submarine network, depriving convoy planners of warnings about patrol lines. This intelligence blackout continued for much of 1942. U-boat numbers were meanwhile increasing as German shipyards delivered the fleet Dönitz had wanted before the war. The Allies answered with mass production and organization. American shipyards launched Liberty ships using standardized designs and prefabricated components, reducing construction times dramatically. More corvettes, destroyer escorts, and frigates entered service, and merchant crews received additional guns and training. Aircraft patrolled coastal routes, while improved coordination allowed convoys to pass from one protection zone to another. By the second half of 1942, victories off the United States had ended. That did not mean the shipping crisis was over. U-boats returned to the North Atlantic, where winter weather, escort shortages, and the remaining air gap favored renewed wolfpack attacks. Allied merchant losses during 1942 were the worst of the war, and German submarine strength continued to rise. The struggle was approaching its decisive point. In early 1943, Dönitz would concentrate his expanding fleet against the convoys, hoping to break the Atlantic supply line before Allied technology, production, and air power could fully combine against him. The crisis reached its dangerous height in March 1943. Dönitz, now Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy, concentrated large patrol lines across the North Atlantic convoy routes. Wolf packs attacked convoys HX-229 and SC-122 as they traveled towards Britain, sinking 22 merchant ships for the loss of only one U-boat. In total, submarines destroyed more than 100 Allied merchant vessels during the month. Some British officials feared that continued losses on this scale might make the convoy system unsustainable. Yet March also concealed a change in the balance. The Allies were no longer relying upon one weapon or a single fortunate breakthrough. Escort crews had accumulated years of experience, and specialist support groups could leave one convoy to reinforce another or continue hunting a submarine after the merchant ships had passed. High-frequency direction finding revealed the bearing of German radio transmissions. Improved depth charge patterns and the forward-throwing Hedgehog mortar allowed escorts to attack while maintaining sonar contact. Air power was transforming the battlefield. Very long-range Liberators increasingly patrolled the mid-Atlantic gap, while escort carriers placed aircraft above convoys far from land. Centimetric radar could detect a surfaced U-boat and was difficult for existing German warning receivers to identify. At night, aircraft equipped with the Lee light approached under radar guidance before illuminating a submarine at the moment of attack. U-boats that had once used darkness as protection could now be surprised while recharging their batteries. The intelligence battle had also turned again. British cryptanalysts broke the four-rotor U-boat cipher in December 1942, aided by captured material and increasingly powerful bombs. Allied planners regained the ability to steer convoys around concentrations or direct aircraft and ships towards German refueling submarines. Ultra-intelligence did not win the battle alone, but it made every patrol aircraft and escort group more effective. The decisive confrontation came around convoy ONS-5 in late April and early May. More than 40 U-boats attempted to attack 42 merchant ships during a prolonged battle in terrible weather. 13 merchant vessels were sunk, but escorts and aircraft destroyed 6 U-boats. The exchange demonstrated that a heavily contested convoy could survive while inflicting losses Germany could not comfortably replace. May became known as Black May among the U-boat force. 41 German submarines were lost during the month, while the tonnage they sank fell sharply. Experienced commanders and trained crews disappeared with their vessels. On the 24th of May, Dönitz withdrew most U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes, accepting that the offensive had been defeated for the moment. This was the turning point rather than the end. Germany introduced acoustic torpedoes, improved anti-aircraft armament, and later fitted submarines with snorkels that allowed diesel engines to operate while the boats remained just beneath the surface. New patrols would test whether these innovations could restore the campaign. The Allies, however, had closed the air gap, expanded their escort forces, and gained the industrial strength to replace ships faster than Germany could sink them. The hunters were now increasingly becoming the hunted. When U-boats returned to the North Atlantic in September 1943, they carried new weapons intended to defeat convoy escorts. The T-5 acoustic torpedo homed towards the sound of a warship's propellers and initially caused several losses. Allied crews responded with noise-making decoys towed astern, confusing the torpedo and reducing its effectiveness. Each German innovation created danger, but Allied science, industry, and experience produced a countermeasure. Aircraft now made the ocean increasingly hostile to submarines. Escort carriers accompanied convoys, long-range patrol aircraft covered previously inaccessible waters, and centimetric radar reduced the safety of darkness. Allied aircraft also attacked U-boats crossing the Bay of Biscay between French bases and the Atlantic. Heavier anti-aircraft guns encouraged some U-boats to fight surfaced, usually exposing them to repeated attacks. Hunter-killer groups pursued submarines independently, supported by intelligence and radio direction finding. The destruction of supply U-boats further restricted German operations. These large vessels, nicknamed milk cows, carried fuel, torpedoes, and provisions to attack boats far from Europe. Once Allied intelligence identified their meeting areas, aircraft and warships targeted them. Without refueling support, ordinary U-boats could spend less time in distant patrol zones. German operations continued elsewhere, but could no longer threaten the main Allied supply system. Control of the Atlantic made the liberation of Western Europe possible. Britain became the base for millions of troops, vehicles, aircraft and tons of supplies assembled for Operation Overlord. A serious revival of the U-boat offensive could have delayed or disrupted that build-up. Instead, Allied escorts secured the Channel approaches and contained the submarine threat during the Normandy landings in June 1944. Merchant shipping also sustained campaigns in Italy and delivered vital supplies to the Soviet Union through dangerous Arctic convoys. Germany sought a technological escape through snorkel-equipped boats and advanced designs such as the Type 21, which could travel faster underwater and remain submerged for longer periods. These submarines pointed towards future naval warfare, yet arrived too late and suffered from production defects, inadequate testing and unprepared crews. Only a handful became operational before Germany surrendered, and none sank an Allied ship in combat. The final U-boats received orders to cease operations in May 1945. Some surrendered at British and Allied ports, while others were scuttled by their crews. The cost of the campaign had been immense. Roughly 3,500 Allied merchant ships and 175 Allied warships were lost. Germany lost about 780 U-boats, and around 30,000 of the approximately 40,000 men who served in them were killed, giving the submarine arm one of the highest death rates of any wartime service. The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest continuous campaign of the Second World War. It was decided not by one engagement, commander or invention, but by convoys, intelligence, aircraft, escorts, shipbuilding, and the accumulated experience of thousands of sailors and aircrew. By keeping the ocean routes open, the Allies preserved Britain, connected the resources of North America with the European battlefield, and created the conditions from which Nazi Germany could ultimately be defeated in Europe itself. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Warfare, part of the Compact Histories Network. Please don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you are listening so that you don't miss any future episodes. And consider leaving us a rating or a review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find new episodes at compacthistories.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, science, mysteries, true crime, and disasters. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/warfare and click on the coffee cup to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.